Well, here we are in the place where Peace Apostolic Community usually meets on a Sunday morning, not quite at the moment, but in another week or two we'll all be back here as restrictions ease. But I've been the pastor of this church now well over 30 years, about 34 or 5, and along the way we learned a great deal about corporate prayer. And at one point in our early history, I was away overseas, but a young mum in our church was suddenly struck with a tooth abscess, and it was life-threatening. She would have been dead overnight. She was rushed to hospital in a very, very serious state. In my absence, my senior associate, David Hood, called a prayer meeting of the whole church to come together to plead for the life of this young mother of 3 children. And the church met this Wednesday night and cried out to the Lord, and she was healed miraculously, totally restored, set free. And it was one of the memorable occasions in the church, such a miracle. But it was when the church gathered, with grave of heart, so serious before the Lord, pleading for one of their own. And this began something that it meant that on various occasions when something really serious has come up, usually not just of a grave nature, but threatening, life-threatening, imminent, we would call what we've come to term, taking the terminology from the Bible, a solemn assembly. And this is a prayer meeting where you invite everybody to come who can come, and there's only one prayer need considered, and you meet as long as you feel you need, an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, while ever there's prayer flowing in the group, crying out to the Lord, laying it before the Lord, and until you feel satisfied, it's been prayed through, and there's an answer from heaven, there's a peace, there's a grace, there's some sense of breakthrough that has been obtained. Well, later, some years later, we had a young mum in the church, really middle-aged mum. Her kids were a little bit older, and she also had 3. And she was diagnosed with cancer, but the cancer was in her face. It was in behind the nose, behind the eye, and it meant an operation was called for that actually opened up the face and peeled away. And so we were prayerful. Of course, prayer for Sunday, laying on of hands, personal prayer. But she went to have the operation, and all seemed well. She recovered well from the operation and was back in church, and it seemed fine. We'd prayed her through a crisis. Her name was Wendy. But a couple of years later, the identical cancer reoccurred, and it meant the whole operation had to be done again, the opening up of the face. And we thought, no, this is serious. This is a serious business. And at the time that all this was happening very suddenly, of course, at the time of this crisis, we called one of these solemn assemblies. And by that time, of course, we were in this building, and the group that was available that night was about 60 to 70 people. And we didn't meet in the main church, but we met in what was the prayer room just off to my right over here. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to swing the camera here in a minute, show you the door, and the prayer room's right in there. It's not that big a room. It's only 6 meters by 7 meters square. We filled it with chairs, shoulder to shoulder, filled that room with people, because it was our usual prayer room. And there we spent an hour and a half or more crying out to the Lord for the sake of Wendy, whose life we wanted spared by the Lord. I'm going to show you the room first of all. So here it is. We've turned the camera around, and that's the door. Now, this is not our prayer room now. This is now the church office, and we have numbers of people who work in there. And of course, it's got a fancier door now than it had then. But this was the place we met that night to pray for Wendy. And we poured out our heart to the Lord and came to that place where we felt it resolved. We've done all that we can do, implored the Lord, felt that we received grace for her healing. But it was late in that meeting where I felt the Lord gave me a very specific word. And it was a word for all time. It wasn't just for this one case, but for the life of the church. And it was this word from the book of Exodus that came alive. The word that says, I will put upon you none of the diseases I put upon the Egyptians. We took it to mean, the disease that was rampant in the world. No, we would be free. We would have opportunity to live free of these things, to be able to deal with whatever came up. A grace was established. That's been a lot of years now. I should say Wendy, by the way, was healed, restored from the operation. There's never been a trace of it ever since. No, our prayers prevailed that night. But I also noticed that in the years since, it's been easy to prevail in the same kinds of things. There certainly seems to me to be a lesser incident of this kind of thing, and it's not that hard to pray through on things. Not everything we've taken to Solemn Assembly over the years have we had such a conclusive breakthrough. When Chuck Clayton, my spiritual father, was dying, we had a solemn assembly for him, but the Lord's answer was different. The Lord made it clear that night that Chuck was here and Chuck would always be with us, but it was what he'd put into me, that I now had that grace. I was now the father in his place, in the house. And there was an occasion we prayed for, we had a baby in the church born with heart defects, and such serious processes going on, but we had a solemn assembly and implored the Lord for that little fellow. And today, he's a healthy, strapping young boy running around this place. No, the solemn assembly, but this is when the people of God, so moved in heart, so full of compassion, so caring for their own, come and spend the time. It's not just a one-off prayer, it's not just a laying on of hands, but where the whole church will pour out their prayer for an hour or longer, as long as there's need to be, to take a hold of the Lord and believe the Lord for that thing. It's a very important place for the solemn assembly, and I thank God for it. And even right now, we have someone who's been going through treatment, but the treatment is so successful when it could have been so tough and so difficult, all because of a solemn assembly that we held for him. I recommend churches find expression through every form of prayer they can, because my point, which I made some time ago, is simple enough. There's a great deal more healing available to us than we realize, but somehow you've got to press in, find the Lord, take a hold of the grace, take a hold of the gifts, make it your own. There are times when it's a battle, but you're looking to break through. And even if you don't win every battle, it's so important to win all the battles you can win for the sake of God's people. And I think churches can see a great deal more healing than they do, but not just the work of individuals, but the work of teaching a corporate faith to a whole body, getting a whole body of people in faith for such things. And the result is which I think we've seen a lot more healing that then comes off just the simple prayers of the church on Sunday mornings. We're forever doing that and forever seeing interesting outcomes, helpful outcomes. Anyway, I recommend to you, the really heartfelt prayer of gathering the whole church when there's a crisis.